Ladies and gentlemen, the next session, Detroit, Architects of Prosperity, is sponsored by DTE Energy. Please welcome the former emergency manager for the city of Detroit, Kevyn Orr. Former judge for the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the Eastern District of Michigan Southern Division, Stephen Rhodes. Chief Judge for the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Michigan, Gerald Rosen. President of the Ford Foundation, Darren Walker. And moderating the discussion will be the president of the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, Mariam Nolan.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good crowd here early. I want to reintroduce our panelists by telling you that they are the architects of not only the grand bargain, but the resolution of the largest municipal bankruptcy in this country. They did make history. We're fortunate that we had the right people at the right place at the right time, and together really brought forth the very successful resolution of a very complex case. I'm going to start with Judge Rhodes. Good morning. I was in your court when you gave your oral decision. That's not the right word, but
confirmation opinion? Yes.
Confirmation opinion. And I was particularly taken by the messages you gave to lots. And you chose to end your opinion with a quote from Marian Wright Edelman, which is that democracy is not a spectator sport. Tell us what you thought about when you took the case and why you decided to end with that kind of a quote.
At the end of the bankruptcy case, Kevyn Orr had done a fabulous job, but he was transitioning governance of the city of Detroit back to the elected leaders. And we had been through this period of contracted democracy in the city of Detroit. It was something none of us liked to do, but it was necessary to fix the problem. And so I wanted to focus the people of the city of Detroit on their responsibilities as members of our democratic society, that ultimately the success of our democracy depends on them. Sure, the leaders are responsible, but it's up to the people to hold the leaders accountable and responsible. And more than that, it's also their responsibility to assist their leaders in the revitalization of the city. If I can misquote President Kennedy slightly, it's not for the people of the city of Detroit to ask what the city can do for them. It's for them to ask what they can do for the city.
Absolutely. Thank you. Judge Rosen, if you don't know this, Judge Rosen never sleeps. And during the entire time he was chief mediator, he would find you 24/7, no matter what you were doing or wherever you were.
Usually emailing with all the people up here.
That's right. That's right. I want to just ask you why several months ago you and one of your mediation team, Eugene Dreiker, decided to do an op-ed that really talked about the importance and relevance of mediation and why it could or should be used in other civic matters. That was one of the lessons that you chose to talk about. What's your reaction to that, and what?
Eugene and I thought it was important to get the message out that in situations where problems seem, at least at first blush, intractable, there are pathways that can be created to solutions. And that's not just limited to litigation. I've lived almost all of my adult life in the world of litigation from one side of the bench or the other. And I know that mediation works in litigation. But Eugene and I both thought that it also works, it can work in a more policy-centered dispute, which is, of course, what we found. And we thought that we could distill it down to 4 C's. First, candor. The parties have to come together and be honest with each other and face the problems. As Steve likes to say, denial is a river in Egypt. It's not an approach to solving problems. So first, candor. Then cooperation. Focusing not so much on the personalities or the politics of a problem, but focusing on what the real issues are and getting to the issues. Next, creativity. And I think everybody up here, we were doing this without an instruction manual, and we all had to be creative. Probably the greatest example of that is what's become known as the grand bargain. And finally, courage. And everybody here, including you, Mariam, had courage. Mariam and Darren and Rip and the other foundation partners in our negotiations were incredibly visionary and courageous, thinking outside the box with us. When we first came to them with the idea of the grand bargain, they didn't laugh at us. And,
No, we did.
Just it took not to his face.
Right. Just didn't tell him.
it took courage and creativity to do these things. And I think it works beyond the litigation context. It can work in other public policy disputes.
Yeah, I think it's a very important lesson that I thought it was good to draw it up. So Kevin, I remember the first time I heard you in Detroit, and you told us the cold, hard facts, and you continued throughout the entire time to remind us of what was real. I never told you this, but I always thought of you as Mr. Tough Love.
I'm actually a cream puff inside, so.
So Mr. Tough Love, what should we be thinking about now?
I think you're thinking about exactly what's going on. I see some of the leadership of the city here in the audience today, for instance, and they're doing an exceptional job of keeping on track. In fact, the measures that we had in our plan of adjustment are either being met or exceeded. I think that's tremendous. I think the level of cooperation regionally, I hope, continues for a number of different issues, water, transportation, whatever along those lines. Heard the prior speaker speaking about that. But I think one of the things, in fact, that the policy conference did was they added a session on inclusion. And I think that's a tremendous issue. Downtown is going to thrive. I was in Auckland, New Zealand, and Sydney, Australia 2 weeks ago, and there were people there asking, how do I get involved in Detroit? How do I make an investment? I've had friends I haven't heard from in 30 years saying their children are moving to the city. I said, well, good luck. You can't find a place to live downtown. It's 98% leased. But with 5 major infrastructure projects coming online in this city, M1 Light Rail, Matt Cullen is involved with, the new bridge, the Welcoming Center, the Illich family is doing the Red Wing Stadium, and the 5 separate neighborhoods are being built. There's so much energy, economic development, and opportunity for training and growth. How do we include the entire city is the next real challenge.
Absolutely. Well, so I'm going to throw it to Darren next. And Darren, you came by 5 or 6 different modes of transportation yesterday to get here, so thanks very much for coming. We're glad to have you. I know that when, at least I called you, you were only a couple months in your new job, and you took, I think, a really courageous act to come forward, and I've told everyone, and I'll keep saying that we wouldn't have had the grand bargain without your commitment and Ford's commitment. Absolutely.
You're very nice, but first of all, it is always a thrill for me to come to Detroit. I find that there are few cities in the world more interesting than Detroit. And I was in Delhi last week, and I always get questions about Detroit. Wherever I am in the world, this city, for some reason, is associated with the American brand. Yeah. And I always say, what happens in Detroit matters to America. And so it's very easy. It wasn't courageous, actually. The Ford Foundation's capital was made in Detroit. And since 1936, we have had an enduring commitment to this city. I, the 10th president, may have supercharged that somewhat, but it reflects a deep appreciation to our founders, to Edsel and Henry and their family. It reflects, I think, our belief in the potential of this city and the region, and it reflects our mission, which is to advance a more just and fair society in the United States and around the world. So actually, it wasn't courage at all. I was just doing my job in responding to you.
Well, that's nice of you to say, but. So at the time you were making this kind of a commitment into a city, into a municipal bankruptcy, some of the national foundations weren't so sure that was the right thing to do. Why did you decide to go ahead and do it? And are you continuing to hear that kind of pushback from some of your friends and colleagues?
Well, there's no doubt that there were some colleagues who said, you're setting a terrible precedent for the rest of us by doing what you're doing. But I think the precedent that was being set, I hope, was that we in philanthropy need to sometimes get out of our boxes, that we too often miniaturize our own ambitions because we have these program-defined areas around which we must do our work. When something that is transformational presents itself, what I ask my staff and my board is, are we positioned to respond? Are we nimble and agile enough as an institution and culturally to grasp that opportunity? And I think if I have a critique of philanthropy, it is that we are probably potentially the most flexible and innovative capital in our society, and yet we deploy it in the most conservative of ways. And so I challenge myself in my own practice, and fortunately I have a board that is very supportive of risk-taking. I've said to them, I can assure you under my leadership there are going to be some tremendous flameouts, because if there's not, I'm really not doing my job. But hopefully there will be some tremendous wins that we will be proud of, like the Grand Bargain. So it's great that the Grand Bargain happened in my first year, because it has given me license to do all sorts of crazy things. And so my board is really, yeah.
Can I tell them about the cartoon on your wall?
Well, there are many of the other funders in the room, and I think they share with you that this is what philanthropy could do. So I'll ask perhaps either Judge Rosen or Judge Rhodes, is there anything that was left undone that was not resolved that we should be thinking about?
Well, you know, there are a couple things that are still going on, and in this aura of good feeling that we have about the bankruptcy, quite rightly, it was, as Steve said in his confirmation opinion, miraculous. Right. There are some things still out there. As we speak this morning, the counties and the city are still negotiating the conclusion of the Great Lakes Water Authority, and under the memorandum of understanding, that has to be finalized. The lease has to be finalized within the next couple of weeks, and I would encourage the parties that are hard at work in negotiating it to keep working at it. It's critically important that that get concluded, not just for Detroit, but for the region and for the state. It's a terrific example of cooperation and creativity and courage. And I think Steve and I are united in believing that we hope that the parties will continue the negotiations as they're doing with my colleague, Judge Cox, who is the mediator in it, and finish the negotiations. So for me, that's still out on the table. And then there are all the financial obligations of following the plan of adjustment and hewing to the line that was created by Kevin and his team that we put together in the mediations and that Steve confirmed. and ensuring that the city follows the plan of adjustment.
Kevin?
You know, I echo something Judge Rosen just said. There are benchmarks in the plan that can be followed, and the city on its website has a dashboard which partially responds to that. But those benchmarks really drive the reform in the city. You know, the general fund budget is essentially a public safety budget. There's 6,000 employees, but 2,700 at police, 1,100 are at fire, 400 EMTs, and 400 or so are at 36 District Court. That's almost 4,000 of the 6,000. So it's crucially important that they maintain that number. But more importantly, when you drive the reform to clean up the city, to do the lighting, to get back to the regular order, you also ensure that our creditors, unsecured creditors, Syncora and Fidget principally, who have milestone settlements, they get their recovery from the reinvention and growth of the city, and from also having the ability to be a partner with the city to grow things. If you're not growing the city, and it's not having that kind of economic development, then their recovery likewise would be shortened. So I think it's dead on that it's important, because some of the executory provisions of the plan will go for the next 9 to 10 years. There's also some carrots. For instance, pension restoration. After 9 years is one of them, that you can go back to that if you have certain funding levels. So the plan's a little complex, but it's really simple. Do things the right way, hit your benchmarks, and good things come to people. If you miss those marks, then you're not going to achieve some of the goals that were involved.
It's extremely important to remember that while we are focused on the revitalization of the city, and appropriately so, the plan of adjustment is basically a plan that adjusts the city's debt.
Right.
And that the plan calls for the repayment of that debt over a period of decades. And so focus must remain steadfast on fulfilling the obligations that the plan commits the city to for decades to come, and of course not the least of which is funding of the city's pension plans.
Right.
The plan of adjustment gives the city a 9 or 10 year break from that funding, but that funding will kick in hard and heavy in about 9 years, and the city must keep its eye on that and be prepared to make those payments when they come due, so that this never happens again.
And I think the corollary, I think that accompanies this is what Kevin said earlier. There has to be a focus on the fiscal stewardship of the city. There has to be a focus on the business of the city, building a vibrant and a robust economy. But as Kevin said earlier, there has to be an approach to including everyone. One of the real challenges for Detroit is the legacy of inequality, the legacy of racial division, the legacy of not having a regional, I think a regional paradigm. If a regional paradigm has existed, at least as an outsider, what it looks like to me is a set of suburban communities that see themselves separate and apart from the core city. And in order for Detroit to be successful, there has to be a regional approach to the success of Detroit. The suburban communities and the city's future is inextricably linked. Yeah. The region won't be successful if Detroit is not successful. And so I think it's really important to think about that. On the issue of measurement, one of the reasons I do love Detroit and Michigan is because there is so much innovation going on here. And there's something called the Social Progress Index, SPI, which is a new way of measuring social and environmental indicators of well-being of a state or a region. And Michigan, Detroit, is the first testing ground for this new innovation, SPI, which is something many of us want to accompany GDP to have a holistic understanding of well-being, has just been launched here. And I think it was Deloitte and UMD, Philanthropy Progress. I mean, there's a really exciting movement here around measuring social outcomes. And so we're all watching what's happening in Detroit and in this state.
Well, the message is we got to keep our eye on the ball.
Yeah.
The Community Foundation works regionally, so I share your concern and your prodding on this issue. Also, in terms of measurement, there are certain things that are going to need to be put in place for the monies to flow through Foundation for Detroit's Future. So this kind of keeping an eye on the ball, I think, is a message that is very important. Judge Rosen, you were going to?
Yeah, you know, I wanted to pick up on something that Darren said, because it is all about the region and the state, not just Detroit. And by the way, Darren, you're not an outsider, you're a Detroiter now.
I like to think I'm an honorary Detroiter.
But you know, the grand bargain and everything that we did in the bankruptcy was really a partnership. It was a partnership between government, between philanthropy, between the private sector, and it's a partnership that works when people keep their eye on the ball and look forward instead of rehashing the problems of the past. The past has to inform us, but the partnership in the bankruptcy that we focused on was really the future. What was Detroit and the region going to look like on the other side of the bankruptcy?
Well, and Detroit was now sort of the first, and I'm sure that other cities have been contacting some or all of you for advice. It's always nice to be first, I guess. Kevin, what would you say to another city that's facing a similar situation?
Yeah, actually, I have said to some other cities, I mean, I think you need, you know, as Judge Rosen was speaking about, and everybody up here said, Judge Rhodes, and as well as Darren, and you, Mariam, for that matter, you really need, you need leadership at the top. And I think one of the stories that's been lost on Detroit is the amount of effort that Governor Snyder and his team, Rich Baird, I see over there in the corner, put it, you know, people forget that he put at least 2.5 years into studying Detroit, setting up benchmarks, preparing a strategic plan before an emergency manager was appointed. So there was just so much data, but also it primed the pump. I think number two, you know, you need leadership, you need talent, you need transparency, you need cooperation. You need those 4 things to effectuate any real change. But I think the other thing that we got really lucky with was that the community itself conducted themselves in a way with dignity and pride and with civil behavior that we have seen in some other communities recently, whether it's Baltimore, Ferguson, or Staten Island, doesn't have to happen. That you sit in a tinderbox sometimes when you have disparity and frustration going on. And we didn't have that here, and there were people who were looking for that here. So from my view, what I tell other cities is if you don't have the leadership at the very top, which is focused and committed, if you don't have the talent that's willing to come in, I'm just the guy who happened to be in the slot, but the amount of talent went into it. If you're not able to explain to people what the need is, and if you don't have cooperation, you're not going to achieve the results. In fact, for some of them, I said, you know, you shouldn't hire me. I can't help you because you don't have those things in place. And as I said, you know, many times to Mayor Archer, who's in the audience, you know, you left the city in pretty good condition and there was a long slide. It's going to take some time to get back to where we are. But if you have those things and you're willing to make the commitment, it can happen. If you don't have them, the probability of success gets lower.
Judge Rhodes?
I would give 3 very specific pieces of advice to municipalities around the state of Michigan. And they all pertain to this issue of pensions. I'm deeply concerned about that for this state because Detroit is not the only municipality that had an unfunded pension liability. Yeah. There are tens of billions of dollars of unfunded pension municipal liability in this state. So the 3 things I would say are, number 1, make your pension plan contributions. Now, that seems obvious, but in some places, including in Detroit, it wasn't happening. There are lots of pressures on municipal budgets, but this is one that can't be kicked down the road. Number 2, make sure you're calculating your unfunded pension liability correctly. There's a convention in that industry in this country that tends to understate the liability by having too high a discount rate.
No.
It's a little technical, but the higher the discount rate, the lower the liability. And in this country, we link that discount rate to the assumed rate of return, and it's too high. It's too high, which means the liability is understated. So watch that. Number three, think about whether the model we have for pensions, for municipal pensions in this state, is an appropriate model anymore. The model we use is defined benefit. Isn't it time for us to be thinking about moving to defined contribution, just like the private sector in this country has? The policy justification for doing that is that municipalities that are having trouble making their pension plan payments and who otherwise are under extreme financial pressure can't afford to undertake the risk that the market places on them when they have a defined benefit plan. And so we need to think about moving to defined contribution.
Yeah.
Judge Rose?
Yeah, and I think another lesson from Detroit, but not limited to Detroit, but for all governments, because we saw the results of it in the bankruptcy, and it's continuing to pile debt upon debt upon debt without restructuring the foundation. So if I had one thing to say to the policymakers throughout Michigan, throughout the country really, is you can't continue to pile debt upon debt upon debt without restructuring the foundation. It's a road to oblivion. I mean, it really is. If you don't restructure the foundation, simply adding more debt is not a solution. We saw that in Detroit. Probably the best example, I think, was the 2005-2006 financing deal that everybody was euphoric about at the time it was done, which turned out, I think, to be one of the great contributors to the bankruptcy. Kevin, you may have some other or different thoughts about that, but
No, I thought it was. I thought the treasurer of the city at the time said this is disastrous. You're going to be in bankruptcy, and the reality is, to Judge Rhodes's point, and Judge Rosen's point, it's phantom debt. $1.5 billion in real cash that was taken on under certificates of participation to pay the pension funds, and it was supposed to cure it. We're never going to pay it back. We can't. Even if you tried to pay it back, you're taking a city of 1.2 million to 700,000 down to 500,000. So the multiplier times multiplicand yields a product. The number of taxpayers continues to decrease. It's entropy. It falls on itself. It's never going to get repaid. So what we're saying here is, lance the wound very quickly. Be honest. Do it. I was talking to a municipality. Their pension fund is at 44%. Okay? It's never going to meet its obligations at 44%. It can't. It's simple math. It can't happen. So as long as you push that out, you cripple the city. You raise unreasonable expectations with the pensioners. And our pensioners are modest, $19,400 on the civil side. You create an unwieldy and basically inextricably downward spiral for both the fund, institution, and the beneficiaries, and you deprive people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s from an opportunity to have a realistic retirement because it's not going to happen. It's criminal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the hardship to the pensioners is unfathomable and unacceptable.
Yeah.
People need to be able to plan, but they need to be able to plan realistically, not based on ethereal sort of momentary promises that have no realistic way to be fulfilled. And, it may be easier to tell people at the time that we're going to, infuse $1.5 billion into a pension fund and everything's going to be great. But it's fairy dust. It really is.
What we're talking about is the intersection of leadership and short-termism.
Yeah.
We have in our culture today a culture of short-termism. And that short-termism that perpetuates, I think, more inequality in many ways and has in some ways been appropriated from some aspects of private sector behavior.
But welcome to McDonald's. You can have it any way you want.
And that you can have it any way you want and you can have it now.
Right.
And I think as a society, and the Harvard political philosopher Michael Sandel has written a great book on this challenge for American society, that we've moved from being a market economy to a market society, meaning that everything is for sale and you can buy it now. And so this ideology has infused our very culture, and it has degraded our culture, and it's made it harder for leaders to be honest, because actually what political leader wants to tell people, you can't have it now. We've got to invest for the long haul. You may not actually see the returns. Your child, your grandchild may see the return. Who wants to have that conversation in our society today?
So Darren, what can philanthropy do to play into taking that on and helping?
Well, this mentality has infused philanthropy. So there's greater focus on short-term metrics. So there's greater focus on quantifiable returns. We now talk about ROI. That's all appropriate in some areas. But in areas like, let's just say, racial justice, something we work on at the Ford Foundation, give me the right metric to tell me in 2 years whether or not we should continue to have a program on racial justice. So I think everything that matters can't always be measured. And what happens is short-termism drives us to want to see immediate quantifiable results. And we lose our way as a culture. And it also corrupts. And what you just described, the reason there was euphoria was because everybody got what they wanted in that transaction.
When they wanted it.
When they wanted it. Right. When, as you said, Kevin, to any honest person, that looked like a complete sham. Right. And yet you had Wall Street, the political leadership, everyone lining up saying, isn't it a great day for Detroit? Right. Because everybody got paid that day. When in fact, long term, everyone's stability and the vitality of the city was undermined.
It was sort of like Munich in 1938 as the prelude to World War II.
So the one constant in our society and in our democracy is not leadership, because leadership comes and goes. Right. The constant is the people. Right. And so it's on the people to keep their eye on the ball, and it's on the people to keep the ever-changing leadership accountable.
And I think something Darren said is really dead on. You know, when that deal was done, it was deal of the year, and everybody was all excited. And in all fairness, you have to balance all equations. Okay, we got $1.5 billion, and if you had invested it in the stock market in 2006, 7, and 8 when it was going down, the market was at, index funds were at 6,200. It's now at 18,002. If you had been prudent in your management, even at that time with those dollars, you could have tripled your money. We could have not only paid pensions, the 13th check, the dividends, all those other things would have been available, even if you wanted to. But when you expend it in a way that's a lack of, say, maturity and sober management, you wasted it. And it was real money. So in all these things, to see the city start to exercise deliberative judgment, I see city council people are here. I think Council President Jones is over there. To see them start to manage and actually have a deliberation that is fulsome and robust is doing business in a different way, and that's good for the city. But as Judge Rhodes said, that's another 30 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely. Judge Rosen.
On this stage for the past couple days, we've seen leadership, though. I mean, yes, democracy is important because it's the constant, as Steve said. But we've seen leadership. The governor, we have a terrific leadership team in the governor and his team, the mayor yesterday and his team, President Jones and her team, the city council, all working together, I think more than at any other time than I can remember in our region and in our state. And leadership is important. Leadership is important. Honest leadership, candor, and confronting the problems as they develop and getting ahead of the problems.
And just let me say this. When you have that transparency and candor and explain, I see Representative Santana's here, who helped chair one of the subcommittees on the state package. Thank you, Harvey. Okay, when we started that in May 2014, up in the legislature, if you told me we were going to get a vote of 107 to 5, it never would have happened, right? If you had told me that 83% of the pensioners plus were going to vote for the plan of adjustment and cut their own pensions against their short-term near interest, I'm sure Darren and you, Mariam, and Rip was up here a few minutes ago. I'm sure you were hearing from some of our creditors on your board about what you should and shouldn't do to sort of get leverage for us, but you stood firm and came through. So when you talk about the amount of effort that went into this thing against the odds, oftentimes against a number of distractors, close and near, as well as far, and against people who actually in distress, because bankruptcy is a distressful process, actually in distress, made a very hard decision, but it was the right call. I mean, don't we all owe that process an obligation in the coming years to make sure it stays on course?
Well, and one of the challenges, I think, is continuing to get information out.
Yeah.
The mayor is certainly doing that. The media can play a role in that. Because we're all now sort of still, we're all pleased that things are going well. They may not always go so well.
Right.
I'm going to throw it back to Darren because, talk a little bit more about the ability of philanthropy to not only try to solve the questions, but raise the issues. And what can we do in the region? What can we do in the city when we think about the people in the neighborhoods? Give us some ideas.
Well, I think that we have to invest in the public commons, because what inequality does is it actually makes people recede from the public commons, because we feel more insecure and more uneasy and anxious about our own well-being, our own family's well-being. It's very hard. The average American who's worried about debt, their kids' college, their own security in their company, in their workplace, to get them to come to the public commons to solve some larger challenge in society. And so we have to invest in the public commons. And what philanthropy can do is to support those civic institutions that provide the platforms that make the public commons. So the institutions, the leaders, the ideas, from grassroots to grass tops. Philanthropy can provide the glue that helps to bring people together, because sometimes that glue is in fact money. At other times that glue is the leadership, because I do think that leadership matters. And the great thing about Detroit in this region is that there is remarkable leadership. This was one of the stories of the Grand Bargain, was the leadership from the governor all the way down to the smallest foundation, to the union leaders, who, as Kevin said, they were the courageous ones. They were the only ones who actually took an action that personally reduced their earnings, their income. That's leadership, that's courage. The other thing I will say that philanthropy can do is help to tell the story.
Right.
The thing that's happening in Detroit that sometimes people don't, and I saw it in Harlem, where I worked for 8 years. When I went to Harlem in the 90s, I remember we couldn't even get a supermarket to sit down and negotiate. Now, this is a community larger than Atlanta that was a food desert. There was no supermarket in all of Harlem. And we couldn't get anyone to talk to us because we can't go to inner cities, shrinkage and theft. You don't have enough a base there of people who will actually purchase our goods and services, et cetera. These were all mythologies that today have all been proven wrong, but we had to change the narrative. And that's what's happening in Detroit. And that narrative has to start at an elite level. So do you know what? In the last 2 months, I opened Town and Country. There's a story about Detroit. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Now, you may not think, it's sort of frivolous. That's a good thing. I open Architectural Digest this month. There's a story about Detroit. Yeah. Well, now some people might say, well, that's kind of frivolous. That's not frivolous, actually. That's like really important.
Right.
Because influential people need to think of Detroit as a place you want to be. At the same time, you open Ebony, and there's a really interesting story about Detroit. So that you see the full, and you open business journals now. And there are questions, is this, and I see so many similarities. And I remember in the mid-90s, when I started in Harlem, you know, the stories were, oh, this is a terrible ghetto, don't get off the A train at 125th Street, whatever you do. All those things that were written about Harlem when I first started working there. And I just reflect on the tipping point moment when there was a cover story about Harlem as the new place you want to be if you live in New York, which could never have been written, never have been written. I mean, you wouldn't see a white woman at the 125th Street station like I saw 2 weeks ago at like midnight. That just wouldn't have happened in 1985 in Harlem. Today, it is a completely different, vibrant, exciting community that is diverse racially, diverse economically, and that is booming. Detroit has that same potential on a much bigger scale. And I can see it, It is happening before our very eyes, and everybody in this room is contributing to that. And it's just so exciting.
It is exciting. And the other thing I would just add, it's hard as a moderator not to put your 2 cents worth in. This whole process has really been based on trust as well as leadership. Everybody now is at a different point of trusting each other, which I think is going to continue to drive us forward. We're going to run out of time here very quickly. So what I'd like to do is let anyone who wants to have a few more words of advice, comment, reflection.
One thought.
Take a minute.
There's a story about Benjamin Franklin when he walked out of the Constitutional Convention. And somebody walked up to him and said, "What have you wrought?" And he said, "A republic if you could keep it." What have we wrought? A city, a community, a region, and it's up to all of us to keep it. I'm incredibly optimistic about the future of not only Detroit, but the region and the state. Incredibly optimistic, but it really is up to all of us to keep our eye on the ball and to keep it.
Judge Rhodes?
Since I left the bench and retired in February, I've been going around the country speaking about the city, and what I sense as I go around the city, and I'm sure all of us share this, is that not only are people interested in the city of Detroit and what happened in the bankruptcy, they're genuinely rooting for the city. They want the city of Detroit to succeed, and it's a great feeling, and it's an underdog story. People love underdogs, but they're genuinely enthusiastic for the future of the city, and it's our job to continue to promote that enthusiasm.
Mr. Toughlove?
That's a tough love. I was looking around. Who's she talking about? I think there's a great deal of optimism that I have, but there's also a cautionary tale. And it's not just Detroit. There are other cities in the Midwest, whether it's Chicago, Los Angeles, Atlantic City, and others that are, as Judge Rhodes mentioned, there's a tremendous obligation that have to be met. And the one thing I would caution everyone, not just in the cities, is, one of my hometowns, Washington, D.C., has 4 city council people in jail right now. They went through a D.C. control board in the early 90s, got their books right, had a $1 billion budget surplus, but still mischief attended and came back in. Even after that, in the shadow of the federal government, in the shadow of the United States Department of Justice, in the shadow of a U.S. attorney that was robust, a corporate counsel, inspector general, a GAO, an auditor general, human beings are human beings. And when you have a run out as long as we have, the cautionary tale is that for some of us in this room, some of us will still be around, some of us won't, we have to remember and reiterate that tale, so that we do not slide back into prior behavior, not just Detroit, any other city. And we have to have earned the goodwill, that people not just in this city, worldwide, are now attending to this community and looking for us as a steward of that, not just for Detroit, but for the United States. That's a tremendous burden, but it's also a tremendous benefit. And the way the city conducted itself, in my humble opinion, they've earned that right. And I think they'll come through with it.
Thank you. And Darren, we love your visiting Detroit as frequently as possible.
Indeed, I couldn't agree with what my friend Kevin just said so brilliantly. So we are in the business of hope at the Ford Foundation. And so there is no place in America to be more hopeful about than the city of Detroit.
Right.
It is in so many ways positioned for a great future. All of the admonition and advice that these bright men have put forward, I completely endorse. But I also know that at the end of the day, everybody wants Detroit to succeed.
Yeah.
America wants Detroit to succeed.
Yeah.
You can feel it. And Detroit is going to succeed. Yeah.
And you're bringing your board
Join
back
me in
in June.
thanking. Great.
Big news. The last word is Darren puts his money where his mouth is. He's bringing the Ford board back to Detroit in the middle
Well,
of
I think
June.
it's very important to note, Henry Ford II moved the Ford Foundation, as everyone knows, from Detroit to New York in 1948. And the Ford trustees have never been back as a board since 1948. And so I am very proud and excited that we're having our summer trustees meeting in Detroit next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.